What they just got through talking to you about is this it?
Well, she was the enemy, you know. I mean, absolutely, she was a carrier of the torch for, you know, the community of clay. But there was a very specific kind of look and form and so forth that she thought you had to make to be legit, you know, as a potter. It's just dogmatic. And the real cornball romance, you know, with her and her, you know, with the toe kicking that wheel. And I thought, man, that just says it all, you know. The artisan and her wonderful tool, poetically poised, ready to kick that piece of stoneware into immortality.
It's by and large characterized by an effort to create a harmonious object in which the surface and the decoration and the form and the function have a kind of unitary seamlessness. The traditions, these unitary traditions of pottery, represented a fantasy, an idealized, nature-based dream that if one could live a moral life with this vase as a model, one would live a happy life. Well, after the atom bomb went off, this was a little hard to believe. This harmonious tradition is what Voulkos busted up. What Peter Voulkos managed to do is to take the form, the surface, the decoration, and tear them apart, set them against each other, so that rather than having this harmonious, unified form, you had a raucous piece of stuff whose parts were competing for your attention. And this distinguished it from really anything that had come before.
With an intensely experimental and aggressive approach to clay, no one ever changed the course of American ceramic art more radically than Peter Voulkos. In 1946, after his tour of duty in World War II as a machine gunner in the Pacific, Voulkos returned home to Bozeman, Montana, where he enrolled as a student of painting. But within the next decade, Voulkos would catalyze the clay revolution, an art movement that would turn the classical tradition of ceramics on its ear.
When I went to school, I studied painting. I wanted to be a painter. Well, I had no idea that, how do you make a living painting? You know, really, I had no idea. Up in Montana, what are you going to do, paint horses or whatever? But I was forced into doing a clay course, you know, to get out of school. I did actually put it off till almost my last year because I didn't want to go around fooling around that mud. I could see these people working in the mud, and I was wondering, what the hell are you doing? And I just put it off, but I had to take it to get out. So I took that class, and that completely changed my life right there. As soon as I started feeling that clay, that was a big change for me. I couldn't paint anymore. It was just gone completely. I stayed up day and night because I was so involved in the energy of that clay and being able to work. And I had a friend of mine that told me his uncle knew this brickmaker by the name of Archie Bray. And they were going to start a pottery, and maybe I could get a job there for the summer.
It was really a 19th century brickyard workshop that this kind of century doesn't even know what that was about. It just must have been a crew of about 35 to 50 people working there making brick.
Most of them were itinerant workers that were passing through. Most of them were alcoholics, and they would make enough to get their necks drunk down, and they would leave, you know. But they had this crew that kept coming through. They come through every summer. And Archie treated them pretty well. He was a little gruff, but, you know, he was all right. He had a big bark, but he didn't bite too hard, you know. You could deal with him. He'd piss you off a lot, but it's okay.
So we worked right along with the labor gang. We ate in the cook shack, and we went back in the brickyard. We nipped bricks, and we dug clay, and we made sewer pipe, and you name it. We were laborers in the field. And I'll tell you, when you worked on a brick line, picking up bricks and moving them onto cars, it damn near killed us.
I hated it. It was hard work. Nipping bricks. where they come off the line, you had to take the bricks and stack them, you know, this and that. And then at night, we could go over and work in one of the sheds there. There's a potter's wheel over there and some clay.
While Volkas's early forms remained within the classical tradition of Western ceramics, as he refined his mastery over clay, the proportions of his work steadily increased. At age 25, just 2 years after touching clay, Volkas won first prize in national competition, earning a reputation as pottery's new prodigal son.
He did beautiful pots, beautiful pottery on the wheel, just decorating and glazing, and some of the best firings that I ever have recalled were in that period. My recollection of the pottery that was being done in those early years was that it was sort of utilitarian. And you have to remember that we weren't really students of history of ceramics at the time. It was just an activity that seemed important to us. And if it came to questions of art, our heads seemed to be in some other corner.
And here I was this dumb potter from Montana, or just sort of a hick, you know, and I hadn't been to New York. I hadn't been in maybe about one art museum in my life. Everything I knew came from books.
Pete's throwing was an adaptation of having seen some of Stig Lindberg's tiny pots in the magazines and mentally thinking they were very large. And so he started to make them large. So our contact was limited to the few trade publications and the very, very rare exhibitions that happened to come through Montana. But in 1952, we had an important visit by several of the world's most important figures in ceramic art. And that was sort of headed by Bernard Leach of England, who was the famous important potter, traveled widely, had been in Japan for a number of years. He was the kind of man who could sit there and do very nice pots, and it was a kind of a blend of the Oriental and the English.
He was a very brilliant man, let's put it that way, and he did write a brilliant book, and we all used it as a Bible for a long time.
There are philosophies and faiths in the East from which the West could learn much. We have overstressed intellect and individualism. There is in Zen belief a quality called mu. It is a quality we most admire in pots, and it is that rare condition of which we catch glimpses in men and women when the spirit of life blows through an open window.
I liked watching him. Here was this tall, lanky sort of a figure, and he'd put a little ball of clay on the wheel. He had a suit on all the time and a white shirt and a tie. He would work that way. He'd throw one of these, you know, like pitcher forms, put a handle on like that. He never got dirty. I mean, you know, never once getting a, you know, spot of clay on him. And I kept looking at him and I wondered how, so I tried to emulate that too. I had to have clay all over me all the time then. So I sort of made it a point to stay out of the way of the clay that's falling around. So I was pretty clean for a while anyway. I remember driving around in the mountains, and it was getting cold at that time. It was freezing, and I remember Bernard Leach would say, "Stop the car, stop the car." And he'd see that little tree out there? I said, "Yeah, I see a lot of them out there. I mean, that's all you can see." You see a particular tree out there, and he'd jump out with his Japanese paper, and he'd start putting the water on like this, get the thing out, and the damn stuff would freeze right in front of his eye. It just turned to crystals.
I think when he came to the Archie Bray Foundation, he wasn't expecting much. And I have to remember that we were just young men in the field and we were just getting started out, but I don't think that he had a great deal of respect for the American potter at the time, and I think that's the reason we didn't like him.
I had a problem with Leach myself. He had this quasi-Oriental thing, but he, you know, is basically a jug maker from Europe.
Along with him was his very important friend from Japan, Shoji Hamada. And Shoji Hamada, perhaps more than any other person, at least gave me an insight into what clay was about. I think that watching Hamada work was an immediate bond, at least for me, and I think that Pete also responded to that.
How many times you get close to a living legend, you know, like he was? I sat on the kick wheel. He sat cross-legged in front of me. I'd kick the wheel for him, and he'd start throwing, and I just have to keep it at the right speed. And he'd say, too fast, slow down, slow down. You know, helping a guy like that, it's an experiences you'd never forget.
Hamada would make a few very economical moves on the wheel, and I immediately began to respond to the fact that this wasn't just something that you would make to sell in a gift shop.
Having revitalized the ancient tradition of folk pottery in Japan, Hamada now seduced American audiences with an assortment of exotic techniques. Extolling the inherent beauty of the accidental, Hamada worked coarse clay into simple, organic forms, then applied crude glazes with elegant, spontaneous brushstrokes. As he traveled across the United States, Hamada's demonstrations immediately fueled a profound change in the practice of many American potters. Yet while hundreds of Americans became devoted Hamada imitators, Peter Voulkos incorporated Hamada's influence more discreetly.
It started to loosen up a little bit. I started drawing more, and the forms started to change. I got to be able to handle more clay, and I wanted to make shapes on the wheel that I could start painting more on, decorating, you know. And the changes at that point were very, very slow.
The real big turning point was when Voulkos traveled to Black Mountain College and met some of the more important people in the world of art at that time.
One of the big changes in my life came when I was invited to go to Black Mountain College in North Carolina. It was a place where all artists wanted to go in the summertime. It was a good gig, you know, it was up in the mountains and all that sort of thing. And so when I was there, I met Merce Cunningham and John Cage. There were a lot of painters there at the time. I remember like Esteban Vicente. It was the first time I'd heard a poetry reading, first time I'd seen modern dance happen. So it was a big revelation to me, and my mouth was just open all the time. And they'd come over and watch me, and they couldn't believe me either. And they said, would you make me a picture and some cups and all that, and I'll trade you a painting and some drawings?
Well, when Pete returned to Montana, it was just like he was transformed. You could almost see it on his face. I mean, there was a kind of a glow about what he'd been through.
It opened my eyes to a lot of things. I mean, I wasn't just stuck on the wheel anymore. I could do anything I wanted at that time now.
As his reputation spread, Voulkos continued to attract curious visitors from across the country. Though most were eager to witness Voulkos's unconventional techniques, in the fall of 1953, Voulkos confronted a rather conventional visitor from California, Marguerite Wildenhain.
Marguerite Wildenhain was a tough personality. She came to the Braes. I guess we were a little intimidated by her, and to tell you the truth, there was an awkward distance between Pete and Marguerite, at least according to what I felt.
She came up to the Bray Foundation and did a workshop. She was a dictator. You know, she was stuck in her ways. Certain ways you hold your hand to this and this and that, and there was nothing in between she would allow. You know, my way is the only way.
Marguerite would throw some pots, but everybody around there knew that Pete could throw better pots. Pete had a very sure touch about throwing, and while you may not believe it, he was a very modest and somewhat shy person in those years. But he didn't exactly like to perform all the time. And when he did, he was very good at it, because I don't think that there were many people who had taught themselves to throw that well. The thing that really irked her was that the audience kept saying, "You should watch Pete throw." That, why don't we have Pete come in here and throw, see? And I think she was totally outclassed when Pete raised those cylinders very easily and shaped them into difficult, narrow-neck bottles.
She had this feeling that I was some sort of a troublemaker. I throwing something into the stew that shouldn't be there. And I had this sort of feeling about it, you know, and I didn't agree with her Bauhaus ideas either, but it was very dogmatic, and I was not into dogma, and I'm still not. I'm into dogma-free living and being able to express yourself any way possible.
As you know, Peter Voulkos came back from World War II. He'd been a gunner. He had been working in Montana, and he arrives in Los Angeles. He has just seen abstract expressionism in painting in New York, and he's all jazzed. He happens to get around him a group of talented, very talented people, and from that, the movement sprang.
I really hated to see Pete leave Montana, but you know, he got this enormous offer of something like $5,000 a year to go down there and teach, and we just said, well, you can't really turn down that money, Pete, and I can understand it if you want to leave.
Well, I decided to do that after a lot of thought. I didn't feel like I really wanted to leave Montana into that big cataclysm down there. It was Los Angeles.
Although there were fine craftsmen working here before Peter Voulkos, there wasn't a lot of innovative or inventive kind of thinking going on in ceramics. The conventional material that was being produced was, at best, very good craftsmanship. It wasn't very exciting. But when Peter Voulkos went to Los Angeles, the whole nature of what clay art could be changed.
Voulkos had been up in the Bay Area and seen abstract expressionist painting and knew there was a new school of painting different from European painting, which was seeking an American identity. So he wanted to bring an American identity into the work of ceramics.
Voulkos was hired by Sheets to come down and set up the ceramic department. I think Millard had some conceptual idea about what a ceramic department was, and Voulkos came with an agenda of his own, which was to do something different with clay. I don't know that he clearly knew what it was, but he did have a vision.
The problem for people who made ceramics was that ceramics were functional objects. They consisted of bowls, vases, platters, things that could hold things, service objects.
What are we going to do with this milk jug with a handle on it? We don't need that anymore, not in our technocracy, you know, all this technical stuff is happening. Eat off of plastic plates is fine with me.
If you imagine these guys living in Los Angeles in the 50s, a city that was suddenly being transformed from a small city into a suburban sprawl, in which an aerospace industry was starting to get off the ground, in which Disneyland had just opened, who could believe the nature-based dream that characterized clay as it existed in the United States from the beginning?
Well, what do we do now? We had a table in a room and a bunch of chairs. So I said, where's the students? There were no students. And pretty soon in walks this guy that they'd accepted as my first student. Well, there the guy was, Paul Solder. he fit the bill.
He said, well, welcome to the school. You know, they promised me a new building, but it hasn't been started yet. And I said, well, where are we going to work? And he said, down in the basement. Come on, I'll show you. And when we got there, I was shocked because there was nothing in the room other than a few tables and a sink.
When I went there to visit Paul and Pete for the first time and find out if Pete was really there, I walked into a basement room with nothing in it but a table, and the two guys were sitting there. There was no kiln, there were no wheels. In fact, they weren't even working.
I wondered, now how are we going to make pots? And I said, well, what are we going to do for wheels? Where Pete mentioned, well, we've got to figure out where to get some wheels. For a while, he would go around to other schools and visit them to find out what they were using. And they were using everything from modified sewing machines to commercially made wheels. But none of them really satisfied Pete. And he said,